Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Espresso with Matt. I'm here with my friend Wayne. Wayne, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. How you doing today, Wayne?
Excellent. Happy to be here and happy to have this conversation with you.
Absolutely. So the first question we ask all the time, well, what you got going on in the coffee mug today? What are you drinking there?
Well, I'll be honest, it's Café Bustelo.
Okay.
It's still warm and I'm enjoying it.
So I have exactly the same thing. I have a double espresso there, Cafe Bustelo. I made this one on the stovetop today, and I'm still looking for my sponsorship. So if you know anyone out there, maybe I could get sponsored.
Okay. There's plenty of them.
Yeah. How long you been drinking Cafe Bustelo? Is that one of your favorites?
I just started about 2 years ago. My son said, you've tried all these flavors, try this one. And I kind of said, this looks pretty good. They like the logo. And I said, it tastes pretty good too.
Yeah.
But I drink it
My
black. I drink
yeah,
mine black.
absolutely. I put a little sugar in mine, not too much. My wife, who's Cuban Puerto Rican descent, and her grandma, when she would come stay with us, she's passed a few years ago, but when her Cuban
Yeah.
grandmother would come, would start making coffee at 5 in the morning, and of course making every noise you can imagine. But when she made the coffee, she did this thing where she took like about 3 or 4 or 5 tablespoons of sugar, and just poured a little bit of the coffee in it, and then whipped it into almost like a sugar foam. But she used to use a metal cup to do that. So you hear about 5:15 in the morning, you try to sleep, and you hear ding, 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 ding. It's like a big bell going downstairs. And it was Cafe Bustelo all the time. And so it's basically like half coffee, half sugar. But that's how the Cubans like their coffee.
Oh,
So I've been
sounds like a
drinking Cafe
hardcore
Bustelo.
drinker there. Yeah.
It's like a little rocket fuel. And if you ever go to Miami, they give you little thimbles of it on the corner there at some of those
Okay.
diners. So good
Okay.
stuff.
Look forward.
So Wayne, for the audience out there, I mean, you have such an significant leadership history, wonderful examples throughout your career, board appointments. Can you kind of give everyone a little bit of a sense of your background, of your career, your board seats, and what you're doing now as an executive coach?
Yeah. Yeah. So what I like to say when people say, what do you do? I really don't like that question, what do you do? But when I ask that question is really this is how I answer it is I'm a grandfather of two children. I am a father of three adult children. I am married 38 years to the same woman. And so that's the kind of what I do. I am a retired partner from KPMG. I retired 2.5, 3 years ago. I spent 30 plus years in the organization. I was a partner. I was in charge of major health systems, lead partner, and my focus was in the healthcare sector and on the consulting side. And then when I retired 2.5, 3 years ago, I was kind of thinking about, it's mandatory retirement at 60 years old. And I said, it's still kind of early for me to hang up my cleats.
Yeah.
And I said, what is the things that I enjoy doing at work? But more importantly, what are the things that I really want to do that bring me joy, that bring me happiness? And it wasn't about work. But it was some work. So I said, what did I like to do? Okay, I enjoy mentoring. Okay, mentoring was something interesting. So what does that mean? So I said, you know what? I want to explore this executive coaching. So I went and got certified through program and spent a year going through training and things like that. And then so that was one aspect in which I still do today. And then I said, when I was at KPMG, I spent a lot of time in the boardroom. So, well, that's interesting. And I also sat on a not-for-profit board prior to retirement as a mental health board organization. So I said, well, I want to try that. So I said, board work, executive coaching, check the box. It's not a 9 to 5. It's not Monday through Friday. It's something I enjoy doing. But then I said, what else do I like to do? Well, I spend time with grandchildren. I spend time with my friends. I do golf. I volunteer. I do Meals on Wheels. I coach veterans that are looking to go back into the private sector after they retire from their military service. So I do volunteering, coaching, board work. So today my life is very, I would say, very balanced. Oh, did I say play the guitar? Oh, I have to
You
say
haven't
play the
mentioned that.
I
Yeah.
have to play the guitar. So, because if we do this, you see a guitar in the background. So I love playing the guitar. So and I'm not very good at it, but I do practice every day and enjoy uh the guitar work and harmonica and singing and things like that. So my life is balanced. That's a short answer.
Wayne, it's such a great description too, and one some of the things you said really are so important. And this idea that, first of all, not many places you're at for 30 plus years. When you and I talked about it, I left the organization after 26 years, and you were in an organization for 30 plus years. And I don't know how many people are really doing that anymore, but
Yeah.
to be at one place for that many years, but to really sit down and think, okay, what do I love doing? I love that you start with your family first, talk about that and talk about balance and what that means. And then talk about what am I good at? What do I love doing? There's so many people out there right now going through transitions, whether they choose to, are
Mhm.
retired. A lot of people are being forced to change for millions of different reasons. Talk about how you kind of came to that decision today. Hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get involved, and you weren't ready to kind of retire. You want to do different things. Talk about that process and what that means for a leader.
Yeah, I think that you really have to take a step back and when I speak to leaders and I actually teach leadership disciplines, I say take a step back and say, get a piece of paper, write down two or three values that you have. And there are tons of values out there, right? But just write two or three. I'll give you an example. Integrity, trustworthy. Like you can look those up. And
Yeah,
then more importantly, how do you act and respond to those values? What do you do in response? Not just this is my value, but how do you show it? How do you show up for it? And you'd be surprised. And I asked them to do it, just take 1 minute to do this, maybe 2 minutes. And it's the hardest exercise for them because it's like they never thought about like, oh, what do I stand for?
yeah,
What do I really represent? Because it's there will be times in work, there will be times in your personal life when something happens and you've got to resort to
yeah.
what those values you have. And that's why I said start with that first, you know?
Let's talk about that for a second, because when you are so right. I mean, one of the things that I've done over the last year or so is really actually sat down and did that type of work multiple times, like writing my values, my mission statement, my what I'm good at. And it's weird because you don't when you're working or you're focused on different things, you don't really put a language to it sometimes, right? Like you
Yeah,
know what it is, you can hear it, you smell it, you feel it, but you don't have a word to describe it sometimes.
right.
And to actually put a language to it, to actually define it, is such a worthwhile exercise when you actually sit down and say, hey, these are the words that describe me. And what the next step is you talk to people who say, hey, is this me? Does this sound like me? Because I think we have this sense of purpose or sense of self, right, as a leader, but very few times are we able to describe it to others because we don't do that work sometimes. And it's such an important thing. It really is.
Yeah.
It's awesome advice.
Besides, what are you good at? What do you like? What
Yeah,
do you enjoy doing? Is really look at what you're good at,
yeah,
right? And that takes some time. Like what am I missing? What skills am I missing? What do I need to enhance?
yeah,
But really do a reflection. And I always start with the question around awareness. Leaders have to be aware. What do I mean by that? And I think we've touched upon this in the past. Is there's a difference between the truth and what is true. right? There is a difference
Yeah,
because
it's a deep water here.
you and I see the same problem, but
Yeah,
we see it in different ways, right? In terms of my experience is different than your experience. So see things in red, you see things in blue. No, so that's what we think are true,
yeah,
but there's one truth. And that's where I think leaders fall down in terms of, you know what? Am I getting all the information? Am I seeing this right?
yeah.
Should I talk to some other people? Should I get this other data source? Right? Maybe I'm missing. What are my blind spots? And I think leaders tend to like, oh, I'm a leader. I should know the answer.
Yeah.
Well, not
You
always.
know,
Not
Wayne,
always.
you're doing it again. Every time I talk to you, I go home with homework. And, it's fun, but no, it really is important when you talk about that because you know I was thinking about this as we're trying to come up to this conversation as we're recording. Think about how leadership changes over the years for yourself, right? I mean, we have a career progression. We learn new skills. We learn things. We become aware of it. And last time we talked, you had kind of asked me doing my value statement, my mission statement, what do I do well, and did a lot of work with that. Thought a lot about it, and what I realized was fundamentally I haven't changed so much from when I was, in late teens through college, through my early career. I think what's changed more than anything is my emotional awareness of what I'm good at, my ability to kind of vocalize it, talk about it. The fundamental core of your personality kind of stays the same, but I think the idea of being able to kind of identify, bring awareness to it, know your triggers in different ways, and here's where I usually can be best set for success, and here's what I'll struggle with, is what I think maturity and growth is about in
Yeah.
leadership. Um, and I really thank you because every time we talk, you ask these provocative questions like that make you kind of sit down and say, hey, what is it about me? What do I bring to the table here? And I think that's a really great evaluation of leadership. And I want to talk about that for a second with you, like how leaders evolve over time. Um, what did you see in your leadership journey over time? What skills did you get better at? What did you have to bring more to the table? How did that evolve as you got more and more responsibility as a leader?
Yeah. You know, the thing about that, there's no playbook. No one gives you the playbook, right? And you sort of say, okay, you maybe observe a leader here or a leader there. I think early on in my career, I thought, I have to know everything. I was the fixer. Like that the hard problems came to me because I would fix things. That I was a mechanic. You give me a hard problem, I fix it, right? And what I realized was it wasn't helping my team because they were all miserable because I would just micromanage everybody, right? Because that's I was the person. And
Well,
what I realized was over time is I don't have to be right. I need to get it right. And so what I realized is that you can rely, you should rely on your team. You should rely on other sources because I just want to be able to come to an answer that's right. I don't need to be the person that knows everything, right? And I learned that the hard way. But that was my journey, you know. And I think the other thing that was really important as I evolved is staying curious. I think leaders tend to sort of, all right, got the answer, let's move on, and not ask that one last question. It's actually two words you ask somebody. You go through a meeting, you give you information, and you go, or maybe three words, is there anything else? Is there anything else? Is there anything else? And you'd be surprised when you keep asking that question, I mean, in a professional manner, you get more information.
yeah.
And
Well,
staying curious is always is a sign because I always say, you know, I used to go to a lot of these cocktail parties and dinner dances, and you sit next to somebody, and they'd be talking to you that you don't know them, but they want to show that they're very interesting, and they would tell you, I went to this trip, did this, did that, versus someone that asked you a lot of questions about yourself. So you question, who would you rather sit next to? Someone that's interesting, someone that is interested?
Yeah.
And that's where I think where I started to learn more is be interested in people,
Yeah.
right? Ask some more questions and you get better dialogue, you get better information back and forth. So those two things, not being right, not always being the one that gets it right and staying curious. Those are two things I learned the hard way.
Well, wait, I think almost every leader I've ever seen kind of go through that progression. And the ones who really kind of evolve to the next level, past that manager level, because that's usually first people's first role in leadership. It's usually like a manager level where you have to kind of get things done. And you can be very task oriented. It's good to know the answers, hear the solutions. When people evolve past that, I find is when they move past that expertise to being more of a developer, a coach, a builder of people's skills. And you're so right because I think every leader, not every leader, but so many leaders make those mistakes. I know I certainly did. It
Yeah.
took me a long time to understand that I did not have to answer things. And honestly, throughout my career, I found when things got stressful, I went back to that too often. Like it's just easier for me to get this done. I will do it myself kind of attitude. And that can work for a short sprint, but cannot work for a long period of time. And so having that awareness is so important. And it's such great advice. And I wish I could go back and say, hey Matt, you don't have to know everything, but those are the lessons you have to learn. Um, it really is a constant journey of learning from your mistakes, being able to say, hey, I'm sorry, I'm gonna try something differently. Um,
Yeah.
you
I
know,
say to Matt to say to people, and I try to live this, is everyone you meet, it could be at the supermarket, it could be at work, can be both a teacher and a student.
yeah,
We can learn from everybody. We can also, teach somebody. So everyone you meet can be
yeah.
both a teacher and a student. And I think that's if we all start to think that way, I think we have better dialogue with everybody.
I think board leadership is a great form of leadership. And I think leadership on the board, you have to ask those questions because, the leaders at the facility are going to bring in these stats, and you always have to ask, what about this? What about this? You have to get into that a little bit. You know, your experiences of multiple boards you've been on from multiple agencies, how did being curious help you in that type of leadership? And was that important for you?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think there's a way to be curious because
Yeah.
as a board member, you're not management anymore.
Yeah.
So you're not in the minutia. You're not the fixer anymore. You just so you need to know your role, more of a governance fiduciary responsibility. So your questions have to be more around the governance, controls, and things like that. But
Yeah.
but staying curious is always a good thing. So what I try to do is when I get the board deck and I study it before the meetings, I write down two or three questions in each section that I think would be helpful
Yeah.
from a governance perspective, not necessarily how to manage it, because that's not my role.
Yeah.
So knowing your role, I think the other thing is really from a leadership as a board member, it's trust other board members because we all like the question around awareness, we all bring different skill sets to the meeting, right? Somebody's more finance, somebody's more HR, somebody's more cyber, and so it if you all trust each other,
Yeah.
right, you come up with really good ideas, solutions, observations, and I think that's trust and asking appropriate questions in your role as a board member are important.
I gotta tell you, as a senior leader for a healthcare organization, when I got to work with the board and the different levels, it was always really such an experience for me. A, to talk about what we're doing every day, but really to look at things from a different perspective, and that strategic view, the mission driven view, getting a little step back. And I always appreciate those conversations, especially the ones that pushed us to look at things a little differently, to maybe open up to a different client base or to a different group, or why couldn't we do something a little differently? Um, those are questions as a senior leader I just really enjoyed. I really did love that discussion. So I really appreciate you sharing a little bit of your board experience and what was important for you because it really does help in nonprofit
Yeah.
organizations, especially.
Yeah, and I would say to someone who wants to join a not-for-profit,
Yeah.
so I've been on for-profit, I've been on not-for-profits, the current sit on a not-for-profit insurance carrier, Emblem Health, which is I'm very proud to sit on that board,
Yeah.
is very important that I believe that if you're going to sit on a not-for-profit board, that you have some like you're really into the mission of what that organization is. I think because A, you're going to spend a lot of time. B, there's so many organizations that need good board members. So pick your spots that you say, you know what, that's something I can get behind. I can go to a community event. I could get behind what we're doing for the patient, the customer. That's something I believe in as
Yeah.
well. So I think those are important. As someone says, I want to join a not-for-profit. I said, well, what not-for-profit you want to join? Well, I said, well, so let's take a step back. What are you into? What's important to you? What
Yeah.
kind? Well, senior, adolescents, mental health, whatever that is. Okay, then we go down that path. In
Yeah.
terms of areas.
It really is an important thing. I love sharing that discussion. Yeah. Wayne, we had talked a few weeks ago as we're talking about mission driven work and go from there and being a coach and being a mentor for others. And you have done that throughout your whole career, right? Um, we talk right now, there's a lot of people out there who are really in this change atmosphere, I talk to people who've been in the field for 20, 30 years, been laid off, who maybe are looking to refocus their career. Um, you know, what are some of those aspects of change management in per people's life right now that you like to kind of coach people on to talk about to really help people through a challenging time with
Yeah,
change?
yeah, it is challenging, and things are changing every day.
Yeah.
I think the biggest fear is fear of relevancy. I've done this job for 10 years and now it's being replaced by some automation, some whatever, and it can be. And if I don't, I fear of relevancy, right? And I think the thing about change is you've got to embrace change. So it's like, you're driving your car on a sheet of ice, right? And then you want to slow down. What's the first thing you do, right? I know because I've done this for every year. Is hit the brakes, right? That's not good,
Nope.
right? Because you go into the ditch. But
Yeah.
what you've got to do is take your foot off the brake. Ah, that's new. That's something new. That's a change because I'm going to slide into something and not fall down, right? And so I think that you've got to embrace that. Okay, accept where you are,
Yeah.
right? Because you can't move on until you accept where you are, right? This job is no longer needed for whatever reason, not my being, but okay, it is what it is,
Yeah.
right? If you can't, so that's what I say is before we can actually do the change of what you're good at, what you like, what you enjoy, you've got to accept. So you've got to embrace change. Change is good. You know, it's not good for me because I'm transitioning in or out. But let's see what I can do, right? So let's accept where I am, and now let's develop that 30, 60, 90-day plan
Yeah.
that I can start resume building, networking, all the drills, right?
Well,
Like let's get it, and then now I'm moving. Now I'm moving
absolutely.
forward.
Absolutely. I think now too, it is interesting. you know, there's so many different ways to get involved now. And, whether it's, starting your own business or, doing more things on social media, we have access now with a AI in your computer, laptop, and a few, you know, basic equipment. You can start your own videos here. God, I tell you what, 3 years ago, if someone said to you, Matt Paul's was doing a video interview series, they'd laugh at you because this would not be something I'd be doing 3 years ago. But now I'm
Right.
really enjoying it. I'm really
Yes.
loving doing this because
Yes.
it gets back to what I like doing, talking to people, learn and teach and
Yes.
do those things. And have opportunities to do that now. I think those are the opportunities really to look at things in a different perspective. You know, I used to have a leader I used to work with who was from law enforcement background, and he would describe everything as, tactical. And you always describe, changes like getting through the door of an entry. You have to get through the door quickly. I'm like, okay, you'll kill a
Yeah.
little less, but it's
Yes.
true. Get through as quick as can, get to the other side of the change, get to that new side of it, and really will be important. So when we had talked earlier, you had went on a really cool trip, which I love talking about cool trips and vacations and those other parts of life. But talk a little about this trip you went on. I'm curious about this.
About a week ago, my wife and I was on my wife's bucket list. So we did one of those trips to Sedona Mountains in Arizona, hiking the Red Rocks, and then hiking the Grand Canyon, hiking the Grand Canyon. And so it was really fun. I'm not a hiker by trade, um, but I did it and I enjoyed it. And you get the vortex and the energy and the spirit. But I think the what was sort of interesting to me as I was hiking up the Grand Canyon, we went to two different trails. We had a tour guide. She was excellent. Is There's no rails on the side.
Yeah.
And so you take a step to the right, you're done. Take a step to the left, you're done. Like so, I kind of said, "This is scary, but let's embrace the moment and stay present." Right? Not what's happening next Wednesday, not what's happening tonight for dinner. What is happening immediately right in front of me right now? By the way, that's a leadership discipline, being present.
Oh my God, yeah.
And
Well,
so I said, you know what? I said, that's an example, right? Because I think we tend to sometimes leaders, we were thinking about a 2:30 call, a 3:30 call, and we're not really in present where we are at the moment with a project or with a meeting. And so that was like senses up, radar up, that's it.
I mean, wonderful metaphors, and I got to. I love experiential education and doing experiences to help you learn. I will tell you this a few things. First of all, yes, there are no rails at the Grand Canyon. Clearly, you don't realize it's 8,000 feet up on some of those rims there. When I went there with my family, my 8-year-old at the time, I think she was 8 or 7, will tell you we walked. When you're taking your children hiking, you don't tell them how far you're really hiking. It's only a few more minutes, right? And I think it was we took a mile hike that turned into an 8 mile hike. And to this day, if you ask my daughter about the Grand Canyon, she's like, "Daddy took me on a hike that never ended." Like, because when you tell a kid when you're hiking, you say, "Hey, oh yeah,
Yeah,
it's 5 more minutes, 5 more minutes." You
yeah,
really you're like
yeah,
6 miles away.
yeah.
But we had a wonderful time, and that idea of being present in the moment. And I think you only can get that when you really become aware of your surroundings, take a moment, and at work, especially in leadership, that mindfulness, that moment of how can I be the best person? Because the metaphors are there. You make the wrong step, you make the wrong things, bad things can happen. And, I really think that's a great, great leadership lesson about being present, being mindful,
Right.
watching our steps.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just about the next real thing to do.
Right.
Great lesson there, Wayne.
Thanks. I made it, so obviously, so
Well, I'm glad you made it back for the show.
we would have been able to tape this show.
It could have been a lot different lesson if you weren't aware. So Wayne, how do people find you if they are interested in working with you, learning a little bit more about your leadership style, learning about your coaching? How do people reach out to you?
Oh, well, I'm on LinkedIn and Wayne Cafran, and you can always also email me is WayneCafran@gmail.com. I'm happy to have any conversations, and that's what I
Absolutely.
enjoy doing the best. Just like we're having right here.
Absolutely. And I will tell you this, folks, you reach out to Wayne, trust me, you're getting homework and it's going to be good work to do. It really does ask you some provocative questions that really help you think as a leader. Well, we are getting to everyone's favorite time of the day, the espresso round of questions.
Yes.
So I have a few quick questions for you related to our favorite beverage. We'll talk about Café Bustelo maybe. Wayne, what is the best piece of advice you ever got over a cup of coffee in your life?
Okay, and I'm gonna it's 30 seconds or so, but here's the thing. When
Minutes, yeah.
I did an administrative residency as my first job at Booth Memorial Medical Center. So it was my journey was hospital administration.
Yeah.
So I get this residency and I asked the boss, the CEO, what time I didn't know what time to show up to work. He says, I want you to show up at 7:30, 7:15, no more later than 7:30 in the coffee shop. 7:15, 7:30. I don't get up. I don't even get up that early. Anyway, so I got there and I found out that what was actually happening is all the physicians that were coming in the morning were getting their coffee, and then they saw the CEO and they said, you know what, we were looking, here's a project, here's a proposal, here's a this, here's a that. And I realized this wasn't about coffee. This was about meeting people where they are, right? And then you got the best piece of advice. You got your finger on the pulse because all the surgeons, all the physicians at some point in time would come to that coffee shop in the morning and they felt in a very, very comfortable situation to sit down and have a 2 minute conversation and be on the way. And I said, that's what you've got to do. You don't wait for them to come to you. You go to customer, you go to the physician, you go to the patient. I learned that early on, and I never forgot that.
That is a great piece of advice, and what how profound. I mean, just sitting at a cup of coffee, think there's a lot you can do just sitting there having a cup of coffee, and people come up to you, and those 2 3 minute conversations, it's really an art, right? I mean, I used to think about like myself when I used to go meet with people like in that way. I would look at it this way: I'm saving myself 15 emails later.
Yeah.
Those quick questions you can just ask or talk about things, ideas. So important you have those connections. That is really a profound leadership by sitting in the coffee shop. Great
I
idea.
mean, drank a lot of coffee,
Yeah,
but we came back with 4 or 5 ideas and 4 or 5 things that were on the minds of the physicians at that
and
particular
things
time.
and things you had to fix, things you had to work on. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Next express around question. Um, if you could go back and talk to a younger Wayne over a cup of coffee, what advice are you giving yourself?
Don't be so hard on yourself. We're all going to make mistakes, and we're all trying to do the right thing. So I still am to some extent, but it is really just try to do the best you can. And even if you make a mistake, learn from it and move on. That's what I would tell a younger Wayne.
Such great advice. And as a leader, especially if you're on this leadership journey, you got to embrace your mistakes. You got to be okay with learning.
Well,
You're
here's
gonna
the
get
thing.
better from it. Yeah,
Right. I mean, here's the thing, right? You as a leader, you're going to have people on your team make mistakes, right? They're trying to do the right thing.
yeah,
So what, as a leader, you could say, gee whiz, you know what? I don't really not gonna work, but you know what? is that they're doing the best they can. If you come with that mindset and they're learning from it, that's what we call mastery orientation, in that people are learning. They're
Yeah.
always learning, right? And people will make mistakes. They don't tend to make a mistake, but they will make mistakes, right? And they feel bad worse than you do, right? So that's what I would sort of focus on my younger self.
That mindset's so important. I wish I could do it on the traffic. I'm like, that person really didn't mean to cut me off, but I'm from New
Oh
Jersey.
yeah. Yeah, yeah,
But it's
yeah.
true. It's like, when you get out of your mind saying that person's probably trying to do the right thing. And
You never know. Maybe their husband is in the hospital, and they're like, you just don't know.
yeah,
And
it,
you,
it's
you've got to give the person the benefit of the doubt at that respect. And I think that's just being a good human being.
yeah, giving grace to others is such an important thing, and it's so hard to do, but it's so important. Um, you can have a cup of coffee with anyone, anytime, any place, anywhere. Who are you having that cup of coffee with, Wade?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And so I'm a sports person, and so I come think about who I'd want to sit down and have a cup of coffee with, and it would be Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali. And so I kind of say, why Muhammad Ali? Because at some point in time in his career, he was like number one, and then he believed in something so strong. He had integrity, he had values that said, you know what, I'm not going to fight in this war. And that cost him a lot. I always want to sit down and say, you were sitting on top. You could have enrolled in the war. You probably would have never seen battle, but you held to your beliefs. You held to your values. How
Yeah.
did what was going through your mind when that? Because back in the late '60s, like 71, when he had that big fight with Joe Frazier, there were like a divide. People didn't like him. They thought he was arrogant, but also because he didn't support the war. Now, I'm not. It's not a political thing, but he just stood to his beliefs and values. I always wanted to understand why. I mean, because you were on top. You could have easily. So I think the point of it is, I'm going to leave you with this: is choosing courage over comfort. That's integrity. That's what leaders can do a really good job and be a great leader.
I will say this: if you ever got a chance to talk to Muhammad Ali, you might have a lot of questions. I mean, what a fascinating life and individual there. That's a good one. That's the first one anyone brought up, Muhammad Ali, and that would be someone I would like to sit down with a cup of coffee with too.
Good.
Wayne, I want to thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. Every time we talk. Like I said, it's such a lesson. It's such an opportunity to learn new things, to talk about new ideas. You do a great job. I really appreciate you joining and sharing some moments of wisdom on leadership journey. Thank you so much for joining us today, Wayne.
Thanks, Matt. I also want to congratulate you on your journey with the media here. You're doing a great job as well. So thank you for that.
I appreciate it. And it's an excuse to have more coffee. I like your former your mentor did. I learned a lot from sitting there and having cups of coffee. So it's great. Very great stuff. All right, everyone. Till we have the next cup. Everyone have a great day. See you soon.
Bye now.